Welcome everyone today to the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction as a Strategy for Reducing Pain webinar. My name is Tanya and I'm with the Canadian Institute for the Relief of Pain and Disability, and this webinar is co-hosted by Pain BC and the Canadian Pain Coalition as well, and we're very thankful for their support of this broadcast, as well as being supported by the Direct Access Program through the BC government. We're very excited today to have Linda Turner doing a presentation for us on mindfulness-based stress reduction. Linda is the manager of Holistic Health Studies at Langara College. She works in the Continuing Studies department. Previously, she was a clinical nurse specialist for pain management at Vancouver Hospital, University Health Network in Toronto, and the University of California Medical Center in San Francisco. She studied with John Kabat-Zinn to learn how to teach mindfulness-based stress reduction. She has taught the 8-week MBSR program over the past 10 years to patients in pain and members of the general public. This course is offered through the Continuing Studies at least twice a year through Langara. We're very excited to have her today. We will have questions at the end of her presentation as well. So thank you very much, Linda. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tanya. I'm really happy to be here today, and I wanted to just begin by saying that I've been a nurse for over 25 years, and I began working with pain probably about 15 years ago. And what I learned when I first started working with pain was that most of what I knew as a traditional mainstream nurse was not enough to help people who had chronic pain. So that set me about learning about alternate modalities. So mindfulness-based stress reduction was one of the modalities that I investigated. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about it today. So let's get started then. So the agenda for today is to talk about what is pain, the mechanisms of pain transmission, mindfulness-based stress reduction, what is mindfulness, and how it works with chronic pain. In the 17th century, Descartes described pain as being fast-moving particles of fire, and the disturbance passes along the nerve filament until it reaches the brain. And so this is a very ancient concept, and it stayed in the literature and in practice for a fairly long time. And now we know it's actually not true. So what happens when there's pain is that at the site of the injury at number 1, there's actually inflammation. And the inflammation causes the production of all kinds of neurotransmitters that are picked up by the peripheral nerve. It travels along the peripheral nerve to the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. There it synapses and it goes up to the brain. And there's also a 5th stage in this particular transmission that can inhibit that transmission of pain. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So after the whole transmission of pain goes about, there is either the perception of pain or not. And there is something called the descending inhibitory pathway that modifies pain. And the different medications act along the different transmission points along the neural pathway. So this descending inhibitory pathway starts in the brain around the periaqueductal gray matter in the very middle of the brain, and it is thought to have a neurotransmitter that is an internal opiate that actually can modify the perception of pain. And so it causes the transmission down this descending inhibitory pathway. That synapses in the dorsal horn of the cord, and it can actually block this perception of pain. It can actually stop it. It's quite powerful. So these opiate receptors are in the brain, and they're produced as the result of things like past experience with pain, anxiety, stress, levels of stress, cultural traditions for expressing pain. These opiates are produced, and they are either produced or not, and if they are produced, they can activate this descending inhibitory pathway. The descending inhibitory pathway, as I mentioned before, comes down the dorsal horn of the spinal cord and synapses again in the cord and can block this perception. And it is very, very powerful. In fact, so powerful that we almost have no knowledge of how powerful it can be. And I'm going to show you some pictures that in other cultures these people are honored to be part of a spring festival, and they have actual needles into their skin, and they have actual hooks underneath the muscle groups into the body. And because they're so honored to be part of this particular ceremony, they don't feel the pain, and that's because of the descending inhibitory pathway. It blocks the perception of pain. And in addition, around the site of insertion of the needles, there's no bleeding. This is also a direct result of this descending inhibitory pathway. And here's another picture where people are running across hot coals, and they are honored to be doing this, honored to be participating in the ceremony. And when they run across the hot coals, they don't have blisters on the bottom of their feet. They don't feel the pain. They have none of the normal kinds of results from running across hot coals. And another picture, again, where the hooks are really actually underneath the muscle groups, and the person is pulling something with their body. And again, they're so honored to be part of this particular ceremony that they don't feel the pain. They don't have bleeding at the site of the insertion. So it's pretty amazing. You have to admit that that kind of power over the physiological functions is pretty amazing. And it's apparently all within our ability to muster this up with a bit of practice. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about mindfulness-based stress reduction. This is an 8-week program, and it's 2 to 2.5 hours a week. And in addition, there's a full day of practice that goes along with it. It's primarily educational in nature. It's not therapeutic, and there is a focus on what is right with you, not what is wrong. So it's a focus on all the abilities that you would have to be able to strengthen. So any of your coping resources, you're able to strengthen through working with this mindfulness-based concept. This particular program is offered at over 240 medical centers in the U.S. and around the world, and there is 30 years of research in a wide variety of chronic ailments. So this is a slide from a recent journal article where in 1980 there were no studies on mindfulness, and in 2010 it's up to 350 studies per year. So this particular modality has grown astronomically, and it is demonstrated that through a very simple intervention such as 8 weeks of meditation in a mindfulness way, people are able to modify all kinds of things about their physiology. And so I'll go on to describe how this works. This is an exemplary study that was done by John Kabat-Zinn and Richard Davidson and published in 2003. What they did was offer mindfulness-based stress reduction for healthy employees in a workplace setting, and there were 25 people that were randomized to the mindfulness-based intervention and 25 people that had no treatment whatsoever. And so what they found was really quite remarkable, is that in the brain they found an area of the brain that was associated with positive affect. And this particular area of the brain had grown in size just from 8 weeks of practice. In addition, people had, I think there's a slide next, so people had a decrease in the trait anxiety. So in time 1, both of the groups were essentially equal in their measurements of trait anxiety. And in time 2, the people who were in the treatment group had a significant decrease in their trait anxiety. And again, just from the 8 weeks of practice, they had no previous experience with meditation, they didn't know very much about it, and they just practiced according to the criteria of this particular program. In addition, the people had a rise in the antibodies, so that the blue bar indicates the control group, so the people who didn't receive the intervention of mindfulness-based stress reduction. And then the meditation group had a significant increase in antibodies, so that the people were given a flu vaccine, for example, and the people who had the mindfulness component, who had been exposed to mindfulness-based stress reduction intervention, were able to produced significantly more antibodies in their bloodstream. So it's quite profound. It indicates that physiology is actually affected by this use of meditation. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what mindfulness meditation is. It's actually both simple and difficult, and it's about awareness in the present moment. It's about being in touch with everything in the mind-body at one time. So it is described as the triangle of awareness of body sensations, of the thoughts, and of the emotions. But what happens is we often don't bring our attention to our awareness. So a lot of times during the day, we're on an autopilot kind of way, is that we aren't really attending to what's going on in the mind-body. And so when we actually use the breath, we're able to notice what's happening. So I'm going to ask the question of you is, when do you find yourself on autopilot? When is this you? Do you ever notice that you're driving home from work, for example, and you forget how you got there? Or you're driving someplace on a routine trip and you actually are going someplace different, but you forget and you make the same turn that you always make. Or have you ever gone for the whole day without eating, for example? Or do you ever get home at the end of the day and you have just a really bad headache, but you never really noticed that your shoulders were tight and that you were holding your jaw clenched? Has that ever happened for you? So I would bet that in many instances this does happen, because we are all human and we have all very similar kinds of ramblings in our mind. So what Jon Kabat-Zinn suggests is that mindfulness is attention that is paid, and it is intentional. It's moment to moment, and it's non-judgmental. So it's actually being aware of whatever is going on in your mind-body in any given moment, without judging it or without trying to make it different, but just noticing. And I think, as I mentioned before, it's both difficult and easy. It's very simple, but it's very difficult because our mind tends to wander off very quickly. So the mindfulness, again, paying attention on purpose in a particular way. So very simple, sounds very, very simple, but also very difficult. So we're going to do a little bit of an exercise in a minute to actually look into this. This is somewhat of a cyclic process, so that there's an intention to pay attention, and then there's an attitude of open-heartedness and kindness with oneself, which leads to connection and to presence in the body, just noticing whatever is in any given moment. So this is the cycle of attending. You first of all intend to notice whatever is going on. Then you pay attention to what's going on with an open-hearted attention, just noticing, using the attitude of open-heartedness, of kindness, and then connecting, and then noticing what is happening in my mind-body, what is happening in my mind at this present moment. Where is my mind going? And probably an exercise will help to make it more clear. I'm going to come back to these in a second. I'm going to ask you to take a deep breath all the way down to the bottom of your lungs. And so the breath is something that's always with us. We never are without our breath. We can always come to our breath at any given moment. We can actually come right into the breath and sink down. So I'm going to ask you to come into an upright position so that you're sitting in a relaxed but calm way, and your feet are flat on the ground. And you're bringing awareness to the breath and allowing it to come all the way down to the bottom of the lungs. And exhale slowly. And again, taking a deep breath all the way down to the bottom of the lungs. And exhale slowly. And continuing to breathe deeply and slowly and evenly. In your mind's eye, look inside of your body and see what's going on. First of all, bringing awareness to the feet, feeling the feet underneath, or the pressure of the floor underneath your feet. Bringing the awareness to the lower legs. Noticing what's going on there. The upper legs. Bringing awareness to the buttocks, the lower back. See if you can feel the pressure of the seat underneath you. Moving the awareness from the lower back to the middle back and the upper back. Just noticing whatever is there. And moving the awareness over to the lower abdomen and the stomach. Noticing if your stomach is full or empty. Moving awareness now to the heart and the lungs. See if you can feel your heart beating. Continuing to breathe deeply and slowly and evenly. Just noticing whatever is present in the mind-body. Moving awareness to the neck and the shoulders and the arms. And the jaw. Around the eyes, around the nose, the head as a whole. Continuing to breathe deeply and slowly and evenly. just notice whatever is going on in the mind-body. Taking one more deep breath in. And exhale. And then bringing your focus back to the presentation, out of your body, and just notice, what did you notice there? Did you notice any tension in the body? Were there any muscles that were tight? Were there any tensions in the body? Were there any areas that were holding? Perhaps you noticed an area where there was pain or discomfort. I'd like to invite you to explore this area with a gentle kindness, just looking to see, what is this area? How big is it? What color is it? What is it asking of me? So just keeping this exercise in mind, we're going to talk a little bit more about how it's possible to work with chronic pain using mindfulness. I'm going to go back to the slides that we skipped over. And so this mindfulness is observing moment by moment the experience. So it's a return to things in themselves. It's actually noticing what is there, what does this feel like, what is going on, without listening to our story about it. So it's actually just noticing with no particular intention to change it or make it different. It's just noticing whatever is. And it's attending to the contents of our consciousness moment by moment. So that means it's attending to our thoughts and where they go and what our stories are like in our mind body or in our mind. What kinds of stories do we repeat to ourselves over and over again? And so through the practice of mindfulness, it's possible to strengthen the mind to be present in the moment. It's possible, if you think of the mind almost like a muscle. For example, if you go to the gym and you pick up a weight and you bring it up and you exercise the bicep grows stronger through actually pumping the weight by moving the weight up and down. So each time that you move the weight up and down, the muscle gets stronger. And the mind is the same thing. It's exactly the same thing, so that each time you come to your breath and you bring awareness to the moment, that is like exercising the brain to make it stronger, to increase your power of concentration of being in the present moment. And then what one is invited to do through the process of mindfulness is to work with some attitudes that help with the mindfulness practice. And the first one is acceptance. So accepting what is. So whatever is going on for you, just accepting it as opposed to trying to push it away and make it not so. The second is non-judging. So not judging it, not saying this is bad, that's good, but not judging it. Just allowing whatever is to be. The third is openness, openness to whatever is. And a curiosity, so exploring our own mind-body experience with a gentle curiosity, just looking as though a newborn or a toddler would look at something brand new. So a toddler looks at everything with beginner's eyes. They're curious. They're curious. They really want to know, and they're interested in what's going on. Then there's trust, trusting that things will unfold the way that they're supposed to. Things will unfold and happen the way that they do. And then a kindness. Now this kindness is especially important when working with oneself. There's a big tendency to beat ourselves up and to say that we're not doing it right, we're not good enough, we're doing something wrong. But if we can find a way to be kind with ourselves, to be very gentle and very kind, it's a lot easier to look at what goes on in the mind-body with a kind of attitude. Then a non-striving, so not trying to make something different, not trying to fix it or make it better or change it in any way, but not striving, just allowing. Then a patience, that things are going to work out the way they're supposed to, a letting go, and again a gentleness with a gentle kindness to oneself. So I always put the two of them together, gentle kindness, very kind with oneself. So it's almost as though when you're training a puppy to use newspaper to go to the bathroom on, a brand new born puppy doesn't know where to go to the bathroom, and so you would help that puppy understand by picking him up repeatedly and putting him back onto the paper. And you would do that in a really gentle, kind way because you would love the puppy and you wouldn't want to hurt him. But often when we work with ourselves, we are not very kind and not very gentle, and so sometimes you might find yourself saying to yourself, oh, you can't do it, you're not getting it right, you're so stupid, you're really dumb. And so those kinds of things are not helpful in helping us to work with our own mind-body. Is if we can look at our mind-body with a gentle kindness, just allow whatever is going on to go on, and look at it with almost a curiosity and amusement, learning what goes on for us in the mind-body. And so we've done our exercise, and so what happens when we do this is that there's a shift in perspective. If we're able to notice just the sensation of pain, for example, if we can notice just the sensation, sometimes we're able to experience a shift in this experience of pain. And so I think it takes a lot of courage and a lot of work to do this, but sometimes when we look at an area of pain, what you might find is that there's an awful lot of anxiety and tension around it. So there's actually a holding of that pain, trying to cut it out of our body, trying to make it not be there. And so we're holding that area tight. So when we hold an area tight, what happens is that we spend an awful lot of energy holding the area tight, and it actually, our energy goes into holding all the muscles around the pain tight. And so if there's a way that we can just relax around that and look at it in a way so we can actually see this area in the body, and then the next step would be to try and breathe into that area, breathing into it and exploring it to see actually what it feels like and what the area is trying to ask of us. Is it asking us to relax around it, around that area? Is it asking us for certain things? Is it maybe asking us to rest or to sleep? Are we really, really exhausted? So it's actually going to the area in the body and trying as best as possible to be present with it, just noticing whatever is going on there. And so this shift in perspective is possible. Often if we're able to explore the area and look into it, we are able often to see that maybe our story about the pain is making it worse. Maybe we have made this pain the worst thing in our life. And in actual fact, yes, the pain is difficult. It's hard to live with. But we actually have a lot more coping strengths than we thought we had. We have a lot more that we can do and help ourselves with by not being only the pain. So there's a possibility of reperceiving or looking into this area in the body and noticing, what about this area? What can I do with this area? And so through this reperceiving, often there's a rotation of consciousness, and we're able to disidentify with, for example, what our stories are like. What do we say to ourselves? Oh, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. It's the worst thing in the world. if we can be really honest and look and see what our stories are like, often we're able to see a bit more freshly and with some clarity what exactly is this asking of me. And so sometimes we get immersed in the drama of our stories, and we all do it. It's a natural human tendency, is that we have a story about things. And when we see something, we actually don't see the thing itself. We see only our story about it. And a for example would be if there's someone that maybe you talk to on the telephone that you really don't listen to because you have a story about them. Your story might be that nothing they have to say is worthwhile, and so when they phone, pretty much you just turn off your hearing to them and you don't hear much of what they say. Sometimes we do this with kids, is that we would not listen to the child because we already know what they're going to tell us. And so sometimes when we actually come back and notice what is and look at this either hearing or sensation in the body with objectivity and clarity, we will learn something about it. We will actually learn something that we didn't know before. If we can actually invite ourselves to be present, invite ourselves to just notice, so that we can lift ourselves out of the drama of the story and stand back and just see whatever is going on. And so what Daniel Goleman says is that the phenomena contemplated are distinct from the mind contemplating them. So our mind very often whips up a story about something that is quite different than the thing itself. I'm going to talk about the awareness test. And so what I'd like to invite you to do is to do one more exercise with me. And I think many of the people who are listening do have chronic pain. And so what I'd like to invite you to do is actually, with a gentle kindness, if you could bring your awareness back to your breath again and take a deep breath in. And continuing to breathe deeply and slowly and evenly. I'd like to invite you to sink into your body. And if you're able to, with a gentle kindness, is to notice the area where there's discomfort in the body. Just notice, first of all, where this area is. And continuing to breathe deeply and slowly and evenly. See if you can notice what the commentary of the mind is. See if you can notice what your mind says about this pain or this discomfort. What do you say to yourself? And whatever you say is okay. The important thing is just to notice, because awareness is the first thing that we need to accomplish in order to make any change at all. Is that if we don't know, then we can't make it different. So continuing to breathe deeply and slowly and evenly. See if you can catch the mind. It's very quick. It fires thoughts out so quickly. But see if you can notice what it's saying. And then I'd like to invite you to notice the edges of this discomfort. See if you can notice any tension in the muscles around this area. Are you holding it in any certain way? Are you holding it tight around the edges? Is there any tendency to cut this area off from the rest of your body? And with a gentle kindness, I'd like to invite you as best as possible to relax around the edges of the discomfort and to breathe into it. If you're able, just breathe into this area, opening your heart to the area. Relaxing around the edges, and with a gentle kindness, opening your heart to the area, allowing it to be a part of the body. Continuing to breathe deeply and slowly and evenly. If this is kind of difficult to invite this area into the body, it might be helpful to think of a small child or an animal for a minute. See their eyes until you feel your heart open. And then direct this feeling of open-hearted kindness to this area in your body. Continuing to breathe deeply and slowly and evenly. Just noticing for a few moments what this feels like. Maybe even asking the area what it's asking of you. And then taking one final breath in, I'd like to invite you to switch the focus of attention back to the presentation. And just go through a little bit, summing it up, what this exercise will, over time, help us to do is to re-perceive what makes us, what our pain or depression is, that if we're able to see it, then there's a recognition that I am bigger than it. I am more than the pain. And so in this way, we're able to transcend and include all aspects of the experience. So it's possible through this is to recognize that the pain is not me. The depression is not me. Whatever thoughts I have are not me. I am more than these things because I can actually see them. I can witness them from a different place. And so this cartoon kind of sums up a little bit about what mindfulness is that your mind can be full with all kinds of things, all kinds of thoughts, all kinds of stories, all kinds of different directions, or it can be present with whatever is going on at this moment. It could be present with whatever is in this gentle, kind, non-judgmental way, just noticing. So I'd like to ask Tanya if you could ask some questions from the audience now.
Sure. Thank you very much for that, Linda. That was great. We had a variety of questions. There were a few around gentle kindness, and wondering, what does gentle kindness really mean? And how do you apply that to yourself when you are experiencing a lot of pain?
Well, I think as human beings, we're often our own worst enemy and our own worst critic. So there is often a tendency to say, oh my gosh, you don't look good, you're not doing it right. And we're quite harsh with ourselves. And so often when I've worked with people with pain, there's a tendency to wall off the area of pain and cut it off from the body. So actually to wall it off and to make it not part of us. And through doing this, I think what happens is that this breathing, the breath, circulates our chi energy. And so when we don't breathe into an area and we try and cut it off from ourselves, then we actually cut that area off from our chi and from our energy. And I think that probably makes that area even worse off. And so this gentle kindness is actually inviting the area back into the body with an open-heartedness. So sometimes it's a bit difficult to do, especially with something that we really don't want to be part of our body. But the reality is it is. And so if we can help it by opening our heart to it, is that this discomfort is part of us right now. And if we can, with a kindness, with a gentleness, allow it to be as it is without trying to make it different. So in a way, sometimes it helps to think about someone or something that we love unconditionally. And first of all, think of that and then try and open our heart to this area. So with a gentle kindness. So I think it usually we beat ourselves up. I mean, that's often a human tendency, just to say, well, there's something wrong with me, I'm not getting it. And so those kinds of things don't really help. So if there's a way to be gentle and kind, and pretend that you're working with a small child or with a puppy or with a kitten, something very tiny and that you would obviously be very kind and gentle with, try being like that with yourself. So that's kind of what I'm trying to get at, is that if we can take away the harshness and the critical words from ourselves to ourselves, then we can be very gentle and kind, and even that act is enough sometimes to modify things.
All right. And then there was another question about mindfulness and talking about the descending inhibitory pathways and that piece. And they were wondering, does mindfulness actually block the transmission of pain, or is it more of changing our perception? And is it affecting reducing stress or reducing pain, or both?
I think the mindfulness works by reducing stress. So, for example, when someone is under stress, there is a tendency to have an outpouring of catecholamines, and there's a whole physiological function that happens as a result of stress. So the perception of stress is the actual physiological reaction to stress is no different whether we're just about to get eaten by a tiger or if we're just worried about something in our mind. Physiologically, we have the same reaction. And so the blood pressure goes up, the heart goes faster, there's a tendency to tighten the muscles, and we hold tight around things. And so the mindfulness works in probably several different ways. I mentioned previously in the study that was done by John Kabat-Zinn and Richard Davidson is that there's actually a change in the brain so that there's an increase in the positive the brain has an increase in the size of the area that's related to positive affect. And so that changes physiologically. And through that, it probably modifies the actual transmission of pain in some respects. As well, if people are able to reduce their stress level and reduce their catecholamine level, then their blood pressure would reduce and the anxiety would reduce, and again the muscle tension would reduce. So I think it works in a couple of different ways by actually modifying the transmission and by modifying the physiology in the body. It actually is able to release or reduce the perception of pain. And then actually through working with the pain, by exploring it as it is, sometimes people really learn really valuable things about this discomfort area. So it works in that way. The mindfulness is called insight. It's about looking within to try and learn. And in some cases, people realize that the pain is asking something of them. For example, asking them to slow down or to rest more or to take it easy. And so sometimes in actually attending to what the body is asking of us, we can modify the pain.
That's very good. That actually also addresses one of the other questions, which was around how being in the body, mind, and thinking and being with the pain, wondering if that reinforces the chronic pain versus helping to relieve it.
I think probably what happens is that there is a tendency, as I mentioned before, to cut the area off from the body, and I've run into this many, many, many times in working with people with chronic pain and working with myself with pain, is that there is a tendency to wall this area off from the body. And so when the tendency is to wall the area off or to prevent it from being part of the body, there's a lot of energy that goes into holding that area away from the body, which takes a lot of energy away from us and our whole life. And so that it's almost like holding a beach ball underwater. That's how much energy it takes to hold that pain down. And so sometimes by actually relaxing into it, we're able to, for one thing, get a lot more energy. And sometimes what we notice is that this wall is holding back something that is not as bad as we thought it might be. So by actually relaxing into it and being present with it, sometimes we're able to learn some new things about it. It's that it might not be as bad as we think it is, just to relax into it. And yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was just also going to say that's some really good points about how sometimes our expectations might form, making things worse than they might actually be because we expect it to be worse than it actually is.
Exactly, exactly. And oftentimes people will realize that they're holding something underwater. For example, just imagine yourself holding a beach ball underwater and you're struggling with all your might to keep it down. And when you allow it to release and come up, it might not be as bad as you thought. It might just be that you've dramatized it and you've made it that big and that bad, and actually it's just a little tiny thing. And so if you're willing to try it, sometimes, when you hurt yourself, if you could, instead of, there's a tendency, for example, if you stub your toe or hit your hand, that's an acute pain, which is slightly different than chronic pain. But when that happens, there's a tendency to hold it tight and to push it away. And if you can come to your breath right away and try breathing into that area, just almost like an experiment, see if it makes a difference. Just notice the dimensions of the sensation in the body as opposed to pushing it away.
That's very good. And then there was one more question about the actual, practice of mindfulness, and wondering, how do you refocus your mind when you're thinking of too many things at once?
Well, the thinking of too many things at once is a basic human tendency, is that we all think of a zillion things at one time, and what happens is that we think about one thing and the mind takes us off into a story that's in the past or in the future, or maybe we go back and we relive a fight with our spouse, or we go ahead and we worry about something that's in the future, that there's an exam coming up and I'm never going to pass it, and how am I ever going to get through this, or what am I going to do about it? So our mind takes us to all these different places all of the time. And in doing so, when we relive a fight with our spouse that happened 2 months ago, or when we jump ahead to the future and worry about that, even though it's only in our mind, we actually physiologically experience the whole chemical changes that happen in a stress response. So we drag our body through all of that. So if we're able to notice when the mind takes off and goes back to a story or goes forward to a story, and just notice. And once you notice that the mind is taken off, then you have the ability to come back to the breath, because the breath is always here, and bring ourselves back to the present moment. Because realistically, that's all we have is the present moment. We don't have the past. We don't have the future. We just have right now. So the more that we can train ourselves to be here now, the easier it is on our body, because we can actually deal with whatever is here right now.
Very good. That's wonderful. That's very good advice. And I just want to thank you so much for being with us today. And I believe that'll be the end of our recording here.
Could I just add one more thing?
Oh, absolutely.
I just wanted to add one more thing, is that this particular program, this mindfulness-based stress reduction, there's other versions of it. There's mindfulness-based eating and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And those programs are all offered through Langara College. Or you can go online and you can check with mindfulness. It's called MBSR BC. And there's a listing of instructors there that offer various courses throughout the year. So if you live in different areas, you might be able to tap into one of those instructors. And the other thing I wanted to add is that this work is not easy. It is easy and simple, but it's not easy, is that it requires a lot of work with one's own mind. It's not a magic pill. It's not something that's going to make the pain go away immediately. It takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of willingness to explore one's own mind-body environment. So it takes a lot of courage to actually look within and see what's going on. And so if you're able to work with yourself over, well, for example, it takes 8 weeks to get to any kind of benefit at all. It won't be instant. It won't be fast, but it is worthwhile in the end.
Wonderful. That's really great. And as Linda said, the information can be found at mbsrbc.ca, and it is a great site. I've actually been on it a couple of times to help people find some resources around mindfulness, so definitely recommend it. And you can also find some information about, more information about chronic pain, as well as some about mindfulness, both at cirpd.org, at canadianpaincoalition.ca, as well as at painbc.ca. All three of our organizations have quite a bit of information and resources around this as well. And I just thank you so much, Linda. It was wonderful having you do this presentation today.
Thank you.
And if you stay tuned to cirpd.org, we will be having further webinars about chronic pain and different ways of treating it and different research on it. So stay tuned to that as well. Thank you very much for attending today.